It's not that Aisha specifically liked birds. She did, on a general whole. They're beautiful and interesting and have a host of unique features in the animal world. But she wasn't particularly obsessed with bird as an animal. Her room wasn't full of bird posters. She couldn't name the thing that chirped outside her window every morning. She knew the big one she saw on the lamp post on the way to school every few days was some form of hawk, and was reasonably certain she could tell the difference between that and a falcon, but less so between that and an eagle. Crows, too, were pretty recognizable. She didn't know what the difference was between a crow and a raven. She wasn't certain if there even was a difference. Birds were neat, but they simply existed. If asked, she would say she was more of a cat person. But the idea of a bird. Theirs was a world of sky, with rushing wind and no tethers. They spoke to one another in song. They were sharp and fierce and cute and nurturing. They moved in alien ways compared to everything else, hopping and swooping, snapping their heads from angle to angle, seeing things no one else can see, multidimensional. And they were free. The world belonged to birds. The land, the sky, the sea. They were everywhere. When a bird wanted to leave, it simply left. You could cage them, of course, contain them, tie them down, but in all these situations it was the cruelty of a being looking to force a bird to conform that kept it from where it wanted to be. Terrain didn't do it. Weather didn't do it. Nature had given these animals the tools to be anywhere, and it took the efforts of some human to deliberately strip that from them, clip their wings to rob them of the freedom they were entitled to, and trap them in some tiny corner of an already stunted two-dimensional existence that was human life. Aisha longed for unclipped wings. She turned her head from the window and the bird she'd been idly staring at to look back down at the email still on her phone's screen. It was half scrolled down so that only the part that mattered was visible and the preamble was out of view. Illegal in this state. For your own safety we have informed your parents that you... She looked back up toward her window. This had arrived an hour ago. Neither of them were home yet, but she already had a dozen or so messages from the both of them. She hadn't read them past the first two or three. They were growing gradually more frenzied as they came in. She caught sight of a few in all caps before she'd thumbed them up. It would be another hour before her mother was home. Maybe two before Dad. Maybe less if he cut out early for this family emergency. The substitute today had told the school she was using she/her pronouns in class. She hoped a regular teacher wouldn't get fired over this. He probably will, she thought. The panic in her heart had glazed over to a sort of constant burning numbness, like a scrape after a few minutes. If she poked at it, thought about it, it flared up again in searing, pounding agony. But as she disassociated into the trees with the birds, it became a sort of ever-present ache that was distracting but less overwhelming. She'd probably get beat. Foregone conclusion. She dreaded her mother's crying more. It always made her feel like a monster. She probably was one. A monster. To them, anyway. She'd been digging her nails into her arm. The sharper pain helped her hold her focus. It was preferable to spiraling into the panic she knew was waiting just behind the curtain. They'll make me cut my hair. Her parents had already disliked her hair length, but begrudgingly tolerated it as a sort of a boyish rock star phase, but now they'd know. Her hair, her nail color. Would they dig through the closet? Probably. I should throw the skirts out. Tears she thought she'd run out of hit her phone, causing the email to flicker up and down. She'd given up on puberty blockers a while ago. HRT was a distant wish she held in her heart for when she moved out. Those had been painful, but they were things she already didn't have. Something about them was already a far-off dream. But the little things she did have, her ear piercings, her jewelry, a couple simple skirts she'd gotten from a thrift shop, the recognition of her peers, the littlest grasps of a life she knew she'd soar in, locked behind the cage she could see coming mere hours down the road. The sky denied to a bird. She dug her nails in deeper. Ruby droplets beaded around the tops of her nails as they bit down brown flesh, adding to the speckles of previous scarring. The rising urge to simply rip that skin off was difficult to choke down. It smelled wrong. It felt wrong. It sat on her musculature wrong, despite her best efforts. A familiar muddy fury settled in her chest. The indignation of it all. The sheer simplicity of her requirement. She was getting by. With just that small amount of release, just that tiny bit of recognition, it was like staying afloat on the waves on a plank of wood. Cold, scary, tenuous, but she could breathe. They were going to pull that plank away and curse her for drowning. Fuck them, she seethed. Do they think I haven't tried? She winced and blinked, looking back down at her arm. Situated under her fingers were deep gaping holes, as though her nails were talons some 3 inches long. The pain was muted by her own shock. What had done that? She slowly withdrew her hand and looked at it. Normal, for all she could tell, save for the blood on the tips. But she was bleeding profusely from the punctures in her forearm. Slowly her mind snapped into the moment. The pain was secondary to the sheer mystery of her situation and the urgency of fixing it. These weren't small cuts. She couldn't hide this. It was like someone had shoved railroad spikes through her forearm. For lack of a better option, she pulled her jacket off to tie it around the wound like a tourniquet, tugging at one knotted sleeve with her free hand and the other with her teeth. As she strained her neck to tug tighter, her attention was caught by another inexplicable sight. Feathers, black as midnight and tinged with blood, had fallen out of her jacket when she had taken it off. Hundreds of them now lay in a circle at her feet, gently moving as her jacket stirred up the wind. She let her sleeve fall from her mouth and slowly came to her feet. The feathers stirred below her, partially glued to the floor by dried blood. One or two still clung to her jacket. She shakily turned her head to look back outside toward the tree. The bird she'd been looking at earlier was looking back. It had stopped chirping. Motifs are the first choice you make when you're building your character, and they are kind of a category of greater decision making that comes down the way. So the idea behind a motif is that you've created a sort of like vision of self that is broad and has this kind of personal identity based on the thing that you feel. And they're categorized into animal categories specifically because that is a thing that you can have an opinion on that isn't necessarily colored too much by culture. So there's a reason we don't have humans within these categories, is because your impression of human is going to be stinted very heavily by your life as a human. Your impression of a specific animal will vary per person, and that's kind of the point. When you're picking your motif, you're picking something based on how you feel about it, rather than how it might be defined in the dictionary or how it might be expressed in media that other people have seen versus how you've seen it in media. There is another situation that comes in the game right after this one called Manifestation. It's the next chapter, wherein you get a kind of greater form of your motif, one that is a bit more physically expressed, that gets you a little bit firmer into fantasy. You can choose to express yourself as that pretty much the whole time, or you can express yourself specifically in your motif form, so taking elements of whatever the animal category is that you took, or you can express yourself just as human or as a full animal. It's really up to you. The whole idea behind having a body made of medium is that it is a thing that is malleable and ultimately becomes an expression of how you see yourself, not all the time, but even in the moment. Sometimes that will actually change from moment to moment, and sometimes that will be a stagnant thing depending on how you feel about it. Where you ultimately envision yourself is a thing that you get to share with the people at the table, and as your character kind of grows and changes, they may find themselves changing the way they express, either in different emotional states or all the time. It's a pretty simple process of picking between 6 different categories, and what it does is give you your actual stat scores. So if you were going through the character prelude earlier, wondering how it is you actually roll a check and where those numbers are coming from, they all come from here. Each of the different motifs has their own. Here in the section you can see that the proficiencies, the skills are described, what they do, all that stuff. There's a quick reference page, an example character sheet, and then we get into the individual motif scoring systems. So each of them have scores that are already written down and brief rules on how to update those scores as you move forward. And on each page you will also see level updates so that your scores change as you continue to level up. They're all written down here so you know what's going to alter level per level and can keep track of them as your character grows. There's also a bunch of abilities that are appearing turn by turn. You can see Buck, Save Savile on this one. This is Equine, Born to Run, Heavy Lifter. All these things are described on the next page. So you can see at level 2, you're getting these 2 abilities. Level 6, you're getting these 2 abilities. These 2 at level 10, etc. And they're written down so that you had them available to you. Advantage of this system is that your character is pretty much ready to go from the get-go. The moment you have decided which of your motifs you want to play, you're ready to play. But for like maybe 2 scores that are malleable at the beginning, having to do with which proficiencies, which skills you're beginning with, makes the game very easy to get into immediately. It may seem at this stage like you don't have a lot of customization available to you because, again, it's only these categories and the scores are already written down. But there are multiple stages that occur later on during character growth in about like 2-3 sessions after your first level, where you will get things like manifestation, which greater refines these categories into 3 more categories per motif. Um, and then also gives you another thing called an instrument that will greater refine your character another 3 more categories. And then as the character is growing, you're going to get unique abilities, unique spellcraft called brushwork in this game, and also the ability to buy certain things using a thing called favor, which will further customize your character. So even though the startup is really quick, your character will have many levels of nuance that you will be able to get to as you're going instead of having to front load it all. And that's really the intent of this generation system, is to allow people to get into the game just quick as they want without having to sweat having to pre-read a whole bunch of lists. Even these abilities, you could leave them all up front if you wanted to, so that you know what every individual character can do. Good idea. Or you can just go off vibes. And as your character levels up, you see I get, these abilities at level 0. Here they are. When I hit level 2, I see I get 2 more abilities. I will read my level 2 abilities when I get them. And then you don't have to preload all your reading, then you don't have to pre-think a bunch of stuff, and you will discover things as they appear, which this whole game is kind of about discovery. So that's really kind of a fun way to play it.